Again, my name is Benji Cohen with the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series webinars. Welcome to our 123rd episode. Get a great one today, a very important program, in my opinion at least, that the DNR kind of oversees, the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant. So David Stein, the coordinator of that program, is here to talk with us. So David, I'll let you take it away.
Yep, thanks, Benji. So again, my name is David Stein. I am the coordinator of the Conservation Partners Legacy Grants Program, also known as CPL. So just a little bit of background about the Conservation Partners Legacy Grants Program. So this came about during the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Constitutional Amendment. So that was legislation that required the setup of the Outdoor Heritage Fund, the Lizard-Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council, and the Conservation Partners Legacy Grants Program. So the specific legislation required a Conservation Partners Program to encourage local conservation efforts all throughout the state of Minnesota. So in more detail, it was to provide matching grants for restoration, protection, and enhancement for wetlands, prairies, forests, and habitat for fish, game, and wildlife. And all of the funding comes from the sales tax. So diving into the CPL program, we're going to go over how these grants are organized. So we have two main ways that we organize grants. Basically, it's by small grants and large grants. So our large grants are known as the Metro, Traditional, and New Applicant Grants. These, again, are larger. They range from $5,000 to $500,000. We have up to 2 grant cycles per year for the Metro and Traditional grants. We allow private land to be used in these grants as long as they are covered under a permanent conservation easement. Acquisitions are also allowed, so public entities like cities, counties, watershed districts, and SWCDs, and then land trusts can go ahead and acquire land and either keep it under permanent conservation easement or turn it over to the DNR as a newly purchased piece of public land. And these are more open-ended habitat projects, so they can focus on a specific species of wildlife, a specific area of rare ecosystems, and so on and so forth. For expedited conservation projects, these are also known as ECP projects. These are smaller grants. They range from $5,000 to $50,000. We have up to 5 grant cycles for these, so every other month or so we award these smaller conservation grants. They can only take place on public land, however, so only land owned by a city or county or governmental organization. They don't allow for acquisitions, mainly due to their smaller price tag. And we have a specific list of activities that we allow for these projects so they can fit pretty neatly into one of our categories that we provide. So a little bit more detail about the traditional and metro cycles of our grants. Again, these range from $5,000 to $500,000. On the flip side, these projects cannot exceed $1 million total. So that takes into account the amount of money that the CPL program puts into each of these grants, as well as the matching contributions or the contributions on the grantee side. They can't exceed $1 million. These are meant to be smaller habitat projects that can be done in a shorter amount of time. So for each of the traditional and metro cycles, we have $2.5 million available this year, meaning that we have $5 million total for these traditional and metro cycles. And then a little bit more detail about the metro projects. They can only occur within the 7-county metro area. These include Anoka County, Carver County, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, and Washington counties, as well as some of the larger cities, or those above 50,000 people. So these are Duluth, St. Cloud, and Rochester. If the projects fall within those county boundaries and those city limits, they are eligible for that metro pool of money of $2.5 million. If they don't, then they're eligible for the $2.5 million across the rest of the state. This year, we have a new program that we're calling the New Applicant Round. Again, they follow the same rules as our metro and traditional rounds, so $5,000 to $500,000 as a CPL funded grant. Total project costs, again, cannot exceed $1 million based on both CPL funds and funds that are being contributed by the grantee. This has a little bit of a larger pool of money this year. There are $3 million available for these new applicants. They can, again, be from both the metro and in greater Minnesota. So geography doesn't matter for those new applicants. Restoration, enhancement, and acquisition projects are all eligible for these new applicant round dollars. But the only caveat is, since it's a new applicant round, only applicants who have never received a CPL or Outdoor Heritage Fund piece of funding or a grant are eligible to apply. So moving on to the expedited conservation projects, or what we call the ECP projects. Again, these are restoration and enhancement projects only. Acquisitions aren't allowed, just mainly based on price tag. Again, these range from $5,000 to $50,000 in total on CPL funding. And again, $1 million is available in the total pot for the ECP projects, or the expedited projects. So going into a little bit more detail about our expedited projects. So these, again, are split among habitat type. So each habitat has its own set rules or set projects that we go off of in order to get these ECP projects on the ground. So if you're looking at doing an ECP project or an expedited project in forest habitat, the set limits that we have here, you can have a project that covers winter or thermal cover for wildlife, a project that covers tree planting or adding additional trees to a forest, the promotion of natural regeneration within a forest, so removing invasive species and allowing the understory to come back up, bud capping, which involves covering up the young shoots of new trees so they're protected from predators like deer. And then prescribed burning, so having a controlled fire to clear out invasive species or clear out the understory, again, to promote natural regeneration. Again, you can have more than one of these, but your ECP project has to fall within one of these projects if you're looking at forest. Moving on to prairies for expedited projects. These can include things like establishing new prairie or new grassland habitats, purchasing seeds, specifically native seeds. So no B-lawns would be allowed. These are native species found in Minnesota. Prescribed burning of prairie habitats, mowing and herbicide for invasive species, so getting rid of invasives on the landscape through those two control measures. Tree removal and woody encroachment management, so getting rid of trees that are moving into a prairie just to keep the prairie a grassland rather than a forest that's sparsely populated by new trees. And then interseeding of monoculture or low biodiversity sites. So say you have a reed canary grass field or a brome field or a field of just big or little blue stem. This would involve putting new species on the landscape in between those previous species. Again, these are the projects that are available for expedited conservation projects. For wetlands, these include things like water level control structures, fish barriers, vegetation enhancement both on the upland of a wetland or within the water, as well as tile breaks and ditch blocks. And finally, expedited conservation projects for fish, game, and wildlife habitat would include things like brushland shearing, dam removal or modification, in-stream habitat modification, trout stream restoration, habitat improvement on trout streams, as well as stream bank restoration and improvement for other non-trout streams. And finally, site prep for habitat enhancement. That's pretty much an overall sort of umbrella term for that fish, game, and wildlife habitat. Another way to think about fish, game, and wildlife habitat is something that doesn't neatly fits into the other three categories. So things like brushland, savanna, sedge meadows, more things like that. So if you are looking at a habitat that doesn't neatly fall into the previous three categories, chances are it fits within fish, game, and wildlife habitat. So moving on, we do require match for our grant programs. Match is a general term that covers cash, goods, and services that are provided by the grantee to their grant project. We require 10% of a grant award required to be added as match. So say you got $500,000 as a CPL grant, you would be required to put in $50,000 worth of cash, goods, or services to cover that 10%. So going a little bit into more detail about both cash and in-kind match. Cash are direct payments towards habitat work. So for example, if you have, say, Minnesota Native Landscapes doing invasive species removal and their bill came out to be $10,000, if you split that between $5,000 being reimbursed by CPL and $5,000 being paid directly by the grantee organization, that $5,000 that was provided by the grantee organization would count as cash match. Additionally, if Minnesota Native Landscapes offers a discount on that bill of $10,000, say they're chopping off $2,000 as a discount, that would also count as cash match on behalf of the company that put the discount in place. In-kind match, however, is a little more open-ended. These would include things like volunteer hours. The CPL program uses the federal volunteer rate, which I believe is now at $31.80. That would be multiplied by the total amount of hours that have been worked by volunteers, and that can get you a monetary value. We also use equipment use and rental. So hourly rental rates for different equipment can be added as in-kind match. And then value assigned to different goods. So one of our main things that we get for in-kind match are seed mixes, usually provided by the landowner or the grantee organization. So these are figured out based on similar retail values that are available for those seed mixes based on habitat type. And that's usually what gives us our monetary value for those seeds. So again, just as a rule of thumb, the match requirements are 10% of a grant, but you can always go over that. Now we'll talk a little bit more about eligibility requirements. So this is where we get into some of the first roadblocks to individuals, and we're going to discuss how to get over those roadblocks in a little bit. So our eligibility requirements for CPL is that only nonprofit organizations and government agencies can apply. So individuals are not necessarily allowed to apply for CPL, but they are allowed to be partners on CPL projects. That's the same thing with private companies. Again, they're not allowed to apply for CPL projects, but they can be partners on a CPL project. Again, the land must be permanently protected. Either it needs to be public land or it needs to be covered under a permanent conservation easement. And again, individuals and private companies are not allowed to apply for CPL grants, but they are allowed to partner with nonprofits or government agencies to get a CPL grant off the ground. So we're going to move into how to get involved in the CPL program as an individual. So how to get your ideas off the ground and move from just an idea as an individual to a full CPL project. So the main thing that I would recommend is for any individual to keep their eyes open for opportunities. So these can be habitat opportunities, habitat issues. Say you live near a park or a public land or a school that is being infested with invasive species, something like buckthorn or honeysuckle or reed canary grass or brome. This would be a perfect opportunity if it's on a permanently protected piece of land or public land to get the CPL program involved. This would be a perfect foundation to start a project. Additionally, you can also look for wildlife issues. Say you have different species of wildlife that's visiting your land, and some of those species of wildlife happen to be either rare birds or mammals, or even common species. Say you see a red-headed woodpecker that visits your bird feeder every now and then, or you see a turtle crossing the roads near you, or you see deer that are wandering onto public land, and you want to provide habitat to help them out and provide for their needs. That, again, would be a perfect place to start the planning process for a CPL program. On top of just keeping your eyes out for those opportunities, I would also encourage you to do your research about what to do with those opportunities. So what would be the best management practices for some of these issues? Start to research what it would take to get rid of your invasive species problem. What would get rid of the buckthorn? What are the best management practices for reed canary grass? What to do about brome or honeysuckle? And really get that information in the back of your mind for when you make these next steps to getting these projects on the ground. Additionally, what would be the needs of your local wildlife? What would some of those rare birds that you see at your bird feeder need in their habitat? What types of plants, what type of nesting materials, what type of shelter from predators do they need? And look into providing some of those and keeping those in the back of your mind when you present these to the stakeholders that you're going to be working with. And additionally, you can take a look to see what was here before. The Minnesota DNR has great maps that show what some of those habitat types were on the landscape prior to people settling the land. If your land was within prairie, consider taking a look into what it takes to establish a prairie. Same thing with woodland or wetlands or mixed forest up north. These are great things to keep in the back of your mind again when you look into seeing what can be enhanced or what can be restored, or if there's going to be an acquisition, what would be those next steps to getting them back into more of a natural ecosystem. Continuing on with research, there are other pieces of information that you can take a look into. So a lot of local municipalities and governments have current conservation or habitat priorities. Some cities and counties and towns are doing long-term planning, how they're expanding their park system, what habitat project they're looking into doing in the near future, and that would be a good idea to take a look into. Additionally, the DNR has several plans for different habitat types that we rely on when we make planning decisions. So taking a look into those and seeing if the land that you're interested in protecting or conserving or restoring or enhancing falls into any of those plans. And again, keep them in mind when you present these ideas for when you decide to start up a conversation about CPL projects that might be in the pipeline. And finally, I'd encourage you to take a look at the Minnesota Conservation Explorer. This is a great mapping tool that has a lot of different resources about what's currently on the landscape and what has been on the landscape in the past. These show where there's intact habitat of many different types. On the right-hand side of my screen right now, that's a just overall screenshot of what is around the St. Cloud area and what habitat types can be found there. As these are intact habitats, they are under continuous pressure under either invasive species or development. So these would be great opportunities to start the conservation conversations as you move forward. If these overlap with public lands, these would be great areas to take a look into to see what can be done to protect them a little bit more. After doing your research, that's when I would encourage you to reach out to your local stakeholders. These would include things like cities, counties, the county soil and water conservation districts, wildlife districts, watershed organizations, and nonprofits that are located in your local area. Most cities and counties will have people who are dedicated to natural resources or parks or zoning, and they would be really good to reach out to see if they have conservation priorities that they're looking into, and if they have any ideas on future projects that they would like to fund. And that's where CPL funding can be used. I would also encourage you to get to know your local representatives. These would be your city council members, your mayors, your county supervisors, your soil and water conservation district board members, and your watershed organization board members, and even your local nonprofit staff and leadership staff members. These would be great people to make connections with and discuss what your concerns would be and what your concerns are for conservation, and then people to partner with in the future getting CPL grants off the ground. Additionally, get to know your local congressman and senator. They are more than willing to be involved in local projects that take place within their district. And again, these would be great people to have when you're planning these conservation projects. And overall, make your concerns heard. If you have a concern with either a wildlife species or a habitat or a piece of land that's in the public ownership, or if you're looking to acquire land on behalf of the public ownership, make your concerns heard. The more that these concerns are heard by your local representatives and by your local organizations, the more likely it's going to be turned into action or turned into a CPL project that takes place later on down the line. The final way that I'd like to encourage people to get involved is if you are a large-scale landowner. We have options available for all habitat types. Say you're in western Minnesota and you're looking to convert some of your farmland into prairie. There are conservation easements or acquisition projects that can be done to make sure that that gets taken care of by the CPL program. Or if you're within the prairie pothole region and you're looking to take out some potholes and turn them back into wetlands. That again would be something that could be covered under a permanent conservation easement, or if you're willing to split up your land and sell some of it, that would be a acceptable acquisition project. On top of that, these projects can be done in collaboration with your local soil and water conservation district. They can help you with resources to start the wheels turning on how to convert this into a prairie. This can also be done in collaboration with your local land trust, getting that into more of a permanent conservation easement that can be enjoyed by the public as well as the landowner. So if you do have a large piece of land that you're looking to protect a little bit more, feel free to reach out to the CPL program and we can talk about some options that could be available for some of that habitat. And finally, as an individual, know that CPL is on your side. The Conservation Partners Legacy Grants Program is always willing to listen to any project ideas that come our way. If you are an individual and you have an idea of what can be done on your in your local area or on local publicly owned land, please let me know. I'm more than welcome or more than willing to talk about possibilities, ways that we can connect with your local stakeholders, ways to improve your project, and so on and so forth. We're always looking to collaborate with individuals as well as with our larger scale on the ground stakeholders. We will discuss options with you. If you are an individual, we will connect you with your relevant stakeholders. If you have tried to reach out to them and haven't gotten any luck, we can take over that role and get those conversations moving forward. We're more than happy to work with you to get some of these projects on the ground because overall we want good projects on the ground. The more projects that are on Minnesota's landscape, the more great habitat we'll have for people to enjoy, and the more habitat we'll have to dedicate to our local wildlife species. So again, if you're an individual, please feel free to reach out to me. I will discuss options with you and we can get some of these projects moving forward. Now to get a little bit back down into the weeds with CPL, or the Conservation Partners Legacy Grants Program's timelines. So our online application system for this year actually opened up yesterday at around 9 in the morning. So we are accepting grant applications for traditional, metro, new applicant, and expedited projects. So right now, everything is open. For traditional, metro, and new applicant projects, these will have their awards announced in early December. The cutoff for applications for this first round is September 19th. So just over a month and a half to get a project application in. So if you have a project in the back of your mind that you want to get put into CPL this year, now's the time to do it and start those conversations. Again, the awards are going to be announced in early December, and contracts for these awards will be set up in late December and early January. That way we can get these projects off the ground or on the ground and ready to go as quickly as possible. For our expedited conservation projects, the application system will close for those on September 12th. So these are quick. They are awarded continuously, and funds are awarded about every other month. So since this first round is going to be ending on September 12th, we'll most likely have a decision made and funding award email sent out around a month later, so mid-October. We usually award expedited conservation projects around 4 weeks after the round closes. And again, this continuously runs all throughout the year until those funds are all used up. So we are anticipating around 5 rounds again, and we will have those awards most likely turn around every other month or so. And each project has up to 3 years to be completed. So these aren't short projects. These aren't just 1 year to get something in the ground and ready to go. We have 3 years to make sure that all of the contracts are used, all of the restoration work is done, and you can start seeing results by the end of your actual grant timeline. So again, 3 years for traditional metro, new applicant, and expedited projects. You can always go and have projects shorter than 3 years, but 3 years is the maximum. Again, more detail into timelines. Again, the traditional metro and new applicant. The way that these are decided, it's a 6-month process. We start by having all applications be reviewed by habitat-based technical review committees. So we have a review committee for prairie, a review committee for forest, a review committee for wetlands, and a review committee for fish, game, and wildlife habitat. So we have around 4 meetings to get these scored and moved on to the next step. What the review committee will do is they will score based on a set of evaluation criteria. We score each application on a scale from 1 to 5 on each evaluation criteria question, and we average out all scores and move that on to the next step, which is under the DNR division directors. So we have the division directors of the Fish and Wildlife Division, the Ecological and Water Resources Division, and the Forestry Division review those scores that the review committees put forth. They can either agree with their decision or not agree with their decision, or ask for more information from our applicants, and then we would reach out and get that information back. And finally, after the division directors take a look and give their feedback, we bring it forward to the DNR commissioners. So this would be the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, and the assistant commissioner. And again, they would review the scores put forward by the technical review committees, as well as the DNR division directors, see if they agree with them or don't agree with them, and whether they approve or disapprove is the final step to getting the application awarded. If the applications are not awarded, we usually reach back out to our applicants and explain what can be fixed in a newer grant cycle, and have them and just encourage them to apply again using the feedback that was provided by all of the reviewers, just to make sure that their application next time is more able to be funded. The expedited conservation projects, like their namesake, they are a lot quicker. This is around a 2-month process. So the DNR Habitat team is the first to review it. This is just made up of 4 people. So we have an expert for prairie, forest, fish, game, wildlife, and wetland projects. They give their feedback, whether they approve or disapprove. That gets moved on to the Fish and Wildlife Division directors, so the director and deputy director, and they give the final approval, whether they like it or they don't like it, and they provide feedback if they don't like it to our applicants, and they get that feedback and are encouraged to apply using that to make their applications more viable in the future. So our evaluation criteria, again, this is what our technical review committee and wildlife panelists like to use to score each of these projects. So they range from overall project value, so what the habitat quality and quantity the project is providing will actually put forward. The applicant performance, so if they have local support from either other working groups or other units of government or from individuals, that would be a higher score. And the amount of collaboration between all of those local support units, that would add to that applicant performance score. The project benefits, so habitat benefits that the project will provide based on native plants or a nesting or shelter from predators or things that were related to that. If there are habitat benefits that are provided, the better they illustrate that on their application, the better they're going to be scored. The public benefits of a project, whether there's public access, if there's public hunting or public fishing, or other ways to enjoy habitat from the public perspective, that scores very highly based on that. The financial assessment of our applicant, whether the budget makes sense, if the budget looks doable, or if the project is cost effective. That is a good way to get high scores on financial assessment. And finally, urgency. This is more involved with acquisitions, mainly because they are constantly getting offers to be acquired. So urgency will really score high, mainly in acquisition projects. over anything else. Then just a couple of best practices to go over for CPL when you actually do apply. The biggest thing that I would recommend is to highlight your clear project goals. Make sure that they are available to the reviewer right off the bat so they know what their project is going to do in the 3 years that it's going to be funded by CPL. Get those goals on the page as quickly as possible just to make sure our reviewers know what the goal is and how your project will reach that goal. If you're going to be providing seed or planting different plants, list a seed list or a species list. We would like to know what's going to be put in the ground throughout these projects. So making sure that that's on your application would be perfect. We have a attachments page that that would be uploaded to. That way we know exactly what's going on the landscape. If you have specific species of wildlife that you're going to be benefiting, make sure that you list those. We would like to see what would be benefited throughout the project, whether they're rare species or common species, whether they're pollinators or birds or mammals or reptiles. We just want to know what's going to be benefited through your project. If your project ends up having a high cost per acre outcome when you do your budget, make sure you justify it. So this last round, we had a lot of projects that were done on steep slopes. So they had a high cost per acre just because the terrain was not great for mechanical habitat restoration practices. So they had to use specific hand crews and specific hand tools, which added up to their budget. So if you have a similar situation, make sure that you justify it. And finally, make a detailed budget. We would like to know exactly what's going into a budget and what you're looking for when you put forward an application. So make sure that you spell out your costs as clearly and effectively as you can through your budget. Finally, when you actually do get your application submitted and approved, we have monitoring requirements for all of our CPL projects. For expedited conservation projects, you're required to put in a yearly report. That's the way that we keep track of all of those smaller projects. But as we get to bigger projects, these monitoring requirements become a little more intense. So any project above $50,000 in value needs to be monitored by CPL staff. So if a project is valued at $50,000 to $250,000, the project needs to be monitored once over the course of its lifespan. It's usually done at the end of a project just to see how everything went. And if projects are valued at $250,000 to $500,000, the project needs to be monitored annually. So I would need to go out and visit the project to see its progress all throughout the 3 years. So these monitoring visits will be done either on site using a questionnaire and a CPL staff member just going out and taking a look, or done virtually if the project is very far away or if timelines just don't add up or schedules don't add up for both the grantee organization and CPL staff. But regardless of how it's done, this would involve a questionnaire done by CPL staff asking how the project went, how the project is going, if there are any roadblocks that came about it, how contractors did, what habitat they're providing to wildlife, if they've seen any wildlife move in over the course of the project that was interesting, basic overview questions like that. I think we have a list of around 12 questions or so that just gives the general feedback of the project. And then we also ask questions about how CPL is doing, how the program can be improved, and whether or not the applicant has, or the grantee has new applications in the pipeline that they're looking to put forward in this next grant round. And we'll also either take site photos of the project, or we can ask for site photos if it's done virtually through the phone and not done on site. So using this grant monitoring framework, we like to see how projects are doing, and we're going to highlight just a few projects over the last couple of years that did exceptionally well. So the first project that I'd like to highlight is a metro project. This was done at Lake Elmo Park Reserve over in Washington County. This was a Washington County Parks project that they did using both internal staff and contractors. It was a 166-acre savanna restoration done using just under $400,000 in CPL funding. So that is a very large savanna. one of the larger ones in the metro area. And it was done using a variety of methods, both using mechanical removal, using heavy machinery, as well as using goats to remove invasive species. They contracted just a group of goats out that they can move all throughout the park and remove a lot of invasive buckthorn, honeysuckle, and box elder to get this project done. They also added on their own informational signage, and they have informational signage throughout the park noting what has been done. And if you're seeing different project pieces that are going on, like what you see in the bottom corner with that pile of sticks, that's invasive species that they've piled up and are going to burn. And they have information about that on all these signs. So again, this was a very good project. It just ended this year, and it was great to see all of these pieces of conservation best management practices being put into place to get a good savanna over 166 acres again. Next, we have a fish passage that was restored up in St. Louis County, just above the city of Duluth. So this was a partnership between the city of Duluth, the South St. Louis Soil and Water Conservation District, as well as the county supervisors that all came together and organized this project. They used around $205,000 worth of CPL funding just to construct this overall culvert, make a trout stream more passable to trout to benefit fishermen up and downstream, as well as providing pollinator habitat all throughout the project where there previously had not been too much vegetation available. So again, this was done using contractors mainly, but it was a coordination effort between all of these local units of government to get this on the ground, and highlighted a really good way that partnerships can be used to get something that is hard infrastructure in place to benefit wildlife, both up and downstream, as well as people who rely on that wildlife for recreation, so trout fishermen. Another interesting project category that we have are wetland water control structures. These keep wetlands at a consistent level of water for use by wildlife. This was done in collaboration of both Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge as well as Sherburne County, so a state agency and a federal agency both acting in tandem and partnering to get this on the ground. This used $110,000 worth of CPL funding to get this water control structure in place. And as soon as it was put in place, we had rare migratory waterfowl like trumpeter swans starting to move in. They weren't the only residents. We saw waterfowl eggs and nests spread all throughout the area, but it's just another piece of information or another piece of infrastructure that can be used to benefit wildlife that might not fit into the traditional definition of a habitat project, but it's something that does directly impact and affect and benefit wildlife. And the final one that I want to go over is a partnership between both the Minnesota Land Trust as well as a private landowner that had their land put into permanent conservation easement. So this was a 135-acre former corn and soybean field that was located right next to Frontenac State Park down in Lake Pepin. The landowners didn't want to put this back into row crop. They were retiring. So they contacted the Minnesota Land Trust to get the land enrolled into permanent conservation easement. And through this, they were able to restore it into a series of very large-scale prairies all throughout the landscape. And with this, it kind of gives a nice snapshot into what was previously on the landscape prior to this being plowed and turned into row crop agriculture, and provides more of a prairie to savanna to forest transition between both the permanent conservation easement and the state park. So this is right underneath Rattlesnake Bluff in Frontenac State Park. And in this prairie, the Minnesota Land Trust started to reestablish some rare species of plants, things like wild indigo, things like wild quinine, compass plant, and others that really are rare among prairie remnants in this part of the state, but can now be reincorporated into the overall landscape. And finally, just an overview of our CPL projects from the last 13 years. So CPL started in 2010 and has just reached the end of 2023. We're starting our 2024 round just here in August. So overall, we had 950 projects funded from 2010 to 2023. Over these next couple months, we're anticipating to get our 1,000th CPL project. And with the input of individuals and new applicants, we're hoping to cross that threshold sooner rather than later. And there have been more than 250 government and nonprofit organizations that have partnered with the DNR to get these CPL projects off the ground. And if you take a look on the left-hand side, that's all, each individual dot is one CPL project that has taken root on the landscape throughout the state of Minnesota. I believe most counties are covered for a CPL project, with just a couple counties falling a little bit behind, but we're going to be reaching out to them this year to see if they would like a CPL project on their landscape to see what can be done. But again, the overall footprint of the CPL project or program has been immense and has covered the entire state over the last 13 years, and we're looking to expand it even more. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who showed up to our presentation today. Again, there's my contact information, both my email and my office phone number. Again, if you have any questions, I would love to hear them, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone who's interested.
David, great job.
Thank
Like,
you.
like I said before, we count ourselves lucky in Minnesota. I've said in this program 100 times probably that Minnesota's a special place, and you don't realize it until you move away. I spent time out in Colorado, moved back home, and the public access and the habitat and just the access we have to the outdoors is some of the best in the country, in my opinion. And it's because of programs like this that we get to do this stuff. So really appreciate you coming and talking about it and sharing your knowledge and how people can get involved with this. So we had a couple of questions coming in. If you want to, if anybody wants to write down David's email address or phone number there, do that quick, and he will stop the program here in just a second. So one of the questions we got from Alicia, if the area encompasses more than one habitat, how should that be categorized in the application?
So what I would recommend is to let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen really quick. So what I would recommend is putting it into fish, game, and wildlife. That's kind of the overall over-encompassing category that we have. If something doesn't neatly fit within, say, a prairie or a forest, or if you're dealing with something like a savanna or a fen, that's where fish, game, and wildlife really shine. So I would go into that category if you're interested there. Same thing if you're applying for the expedited projects, the fish, game, and wildlife category would be a perfect fit for something that has more than one type.
Great suggestion. Allison was asking, will this be recorded? Like I said at the beginning of the program, all our episodes are recorded, and you can find them at mndnr.gov/discover. Cassie, if you want to put that in the chat, that link to our past programs, that would work. You can find them all there. It doesn't look like we did. You did such a good job. We don't have a whole lot of questions today, believe it or not. So
Perfect. That makes me feel a lot better.
Next week, I hope everybody can tune back in. We're talking about kayak fishing with Ron Strauss. He's the president of the Minnesota Kayak Fishing Association. I'm an angler myself. Love to trout fish. So the grants through the Conservation Legacy Partners program have benefited, me, provided access and stream restorations and whatnot on that. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more next week about that with kayak fishing and how we can access some of these public lands and whatnot too. So if you do have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A section there. If we don't see any, David, do you get super busy this time of year when you get all these grants coming in?
Yes, so July and August are my busiest times. July is when we close out our grants that are ending, and August is when we start our new grant round. So these 2 months are our busiest time. It's also the time where most people have questions, and it's the time where I like answering as many questions as I can. The more people that know about the program, the more people that ask questions, the better I can perform and the better the program gets in the future.
How's funding for the program? Is it been pretty stable, or does it keep increasing year after year?
It actually keeps increasing. Back in 2011, I believe we were allocated around $2 million. And over the course of the last 12, 13 years, it's increased from 2 to 4 to 5. And now we're all the way up to around $10 million. So
Wow,
it's, again, with the popularity of the program and with the amount of habitat that we're putting on the landscape, uh, the more money is necessary and the more money is used by our partners. So it's been very successful moving forward.
that's great. And once again, it's such a great program to be able to get out for all of us Minnesotans to be able to get out and enjoy the outdoors in these areas that have been restored. I live over in the St. Croix River Valley, and we kind of secretly claim the home of buckthorn over here. The buckthorn is just crazy, and I know there's a lot of CPL grants that have come our direction to. It's just the whole area, St. Croix River Valley, to help remove that. So, but it provides some just fantastic oak savannas. I know the one at Afton State Park has some osprey nest and all kinds of fun stuff in it. So, I think with that, doesn't look like we have any other questions. So, if anybody does have stuff, the links are in the chat. Please reach out to David, or if you want to reach out to myself, my email is on our homepage at minnesotadnr.gov/discover, and I can connect you with David if that's an easier route to go. Again, thank you everybody for attending. I hope to see everybody next week for kayak fishing in Minnesota with Ron Strauss. That'll be August 9th at noon as always. With that, everybody stay cool. It's getting a little warm out there again, and stay safe and have a great weekend enjoying our Minnesota outdoors. So thanks everyone, and thanks David.